Our dear Heavenly Father, we come this morning just wanting to thank you for being our helper and our leader today, our guide. And as we talk about off-grid living and solar systems, I pray, Father, for the clear connections and for clear thoughts with my mind so that I can present these things precisely and clearly. And we thank you for your leading today and for your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, a few more people jumping on there. That's good. By the way, for those of you online with the connected by internet, the chat, Matt will be monitoring, trying to keep up on that. I'll try to keep an eye on it as well so that if there's questions coming in or we're not muting the room, keep in mind I'm going to share a lot of information. There'll be some questions along the way. You may want to jot it down or ask, but I may be answering. If you ask the question, if I'm going to be answering it as we go further on, I'll just tell you that. So this is really an introduction to basic solar systems. Just about any one of the topics that we're going to cover, we could spend easily 2 hours just on that one subject. Now we're going to try to cover them all in roughly that amount of time. We'll just see how it goes. So I want to give you a little bit of background about myself with electricity. Electricity and myself started when I was about 18 months old, when my parents were, for some reason, in a lawyer's office, and I was playing with Daddy's keys, and I took 2 keys and I stuck it into both receptacles at the same time. And of course, I charged my battery and made fireworks, which I thought was great. Anyway, my next experience with electricity was when I was 12 years old. My parents were building a house, and I took a liking and an interest to electricity. And when the electrician was there, he started out by letting me drill holes, and then I was pulling wires, and before it was all done, I was making the connections in the electrical panel. So at about 12, I really got my first lessons in electricity. By 16 years old, I was out at one point, and by the time I got home that evening, I had a major electrical meltdown. Every single wire in my car had all melted together in a blob. And of course, nothing electrical worked. The engine barely ran, no lights, nothing. And I couldn't afford a different car. I didn't know I could have gone to the junkyard and gotten a new wiring harness. So I went to rewiring my car and found a few scrap pieces of wire, and there was a mixture of house wire and all kinds of other stuff in there. And when it was done, everything worked properly. I'd hate to be the guy that ever bought that car, though, because it worked, but it was a mess. Anyway, at 18, I was graduated from high school. I took a class in electronics, working towards an associate degree. I didn't quite finish it. I came within 6 months of finishing it, but I ran out of finances as well as I discovered that with an associate degree in electronics at that point in time, it didn't allow me to do much. But it did give me a very good understanding and background with electricity and how it works. We could literally spend 2 hours just talking about how the electrons flow through the wires and all of that. But we're not even going to go there today. Then between... Okay, we've got a question here already. Are you a licensed electrician? No, I'm not a licensed electrician. I have never taken that step. I am a licensed general contractor. I've been around, as I've been sharing, electrical for many, many years. I have wired many houses, including commercial buildings, many times with the electrical inspector coming to do inspections of my work. And so I pretty much know most of the electrical codes and all of that, but I am not a licensed electrician. From the age of 19 to 22 years, I worked in automotive in college and whatnot, and with that, I specialized in auto electrical. Now, the reason that is important we'll get to in a little bit, and you'll understand why auto electrical ties with solar systems. So, let's go on, and the reason on my slide there on the deal, I put free power. Now, that is kind of a not exactly true, because buying a solar system is not inexpensive, and there's a lot to it. But at the same time, when we lived off-grid for more than 15 years, and I built that system from the ground up, I didn't have somebody come install it. I did all the installation, I put it all together, learned by the hard school of knocks on some things, what works, what doesn't, what works better than others, what's more cost effective than other things. And so and we'll be sharing some of that as we continue on. But our electric bill at that point in time, which was the backup generator fuel, keep in mind we were also printing in our homes, so we had a lot of electrical usage, and our backup generator fuel bill ran anywhere between $50 to $75 a month, got up to $75 when gasoline hit $6 a gallon there for a little while back many years ago. So let's move forward. Let's talk about grid electricity as to basically how it works. Please. So grid electricity...
Oh, you can't hear them. You need the earbud in.
Oh, I do. You're right. I got to find the wires.
Just a moment. I can hear everyone on the call, but he forgot to put his earbud in, so he can't hear you.
I'm not used to having to do that. Okay, did we have a question?
Yes, Mark. Very quickly, Mark. My question is this. You cautioned us, you told us we'd be better off on the internet. I'm not on the internet. My question is, the PowerPoint that you're going to share with us, is it archived? Is it somewhere I can go later on and watch it and digest
yes,
it? Or it is?
We're going to, as of right now, this is not, but what we're doing right now is going to be put on our YouTube channel. So probably, if all goes well by the end of today, this is going to be on YouTube.
Superb. Thank you.
Okay. And I got an earbud now, so I can put that around back there just so I don't rip it out of myself here. Okay, so we're going to talk about grid, and I'm going to slow down as we get into this whole bit, but I'm kind of giving just some brief overviews, and we're hurrying through those so we can have more time on the important stuff. So, a grid system. So the way it basically works is the power grid, meaning what most of us have in our homes, is we have a generating station. That might be nuclear, that might be a dam, that might be a solar farm, there could be wind generators, there's multiple things. But then we have a step-up transform which increases the voltage. We'll talk about voltage in a little bit. And it runs it through the wires and it goes out to a step-down transformer, and then it, so it bumps it up to a high voltage. That's so that they don't lose the current. We'll talk about that more. And then it's stepped back down, and then right near the house you have a transformer on a pole that actually steps it down again to 240 volts approximately, and that voltage is then run to your house and split in two, so you have your 120 volt plug-ins. Most of us think of power coming to our house as turn on a light switch, and that is how we get power. But when we go to a solar system, we've got to think totally different. So here is a basic solar system that I have here. We have solar panels, an inverter, and this is actually a grid tie solar system because there's two different types of solar systems. We have a grid tie, which is the power utility grid. We speak to it as a grid tie, and we have somebody that's not muted yet. We have the grid tie system, and we also have a totally isolated, separate, just a solar system. My recommendation, if you want a grid tie system where you can, quote, have the best of both worlds, hire a licensed electrician. Do not attempt to do it yourself. There's too much liability. And simply put, if you try to put in one of those systems and you do not do it correctly, and a utility guy comes out to work on some power when there's an outage or something, the power coming from your system could kill him. Because that transformer that is at your pole that drops your voltage will be increasing the voltage going onto the lines, and you could end up killing someone. So a grid tie system, you want a licensed electrician if you're going to go that way, but my recommendation is go entirely separate. So we're going to go to a little bit of technical background stuff because this is all part of it. Most people think with solar systems that we can hire somebody, they can come out and install it, and all we have to do is turn on the light switch and it always works. That is about as far from the case as you can possibly get. If you have that mindset, you either need to change your mind or just stay on grid, because you will be majorly disappointed. You will think that the system doesn't work right, and you'll be very, very unhappy with whoever installed it, and it will just be a trouble for you. There's things you have to learn when you go off grid. One of those is how power is measured. So to start with, we have two types of power. There is AC power, alternating current, and DC power, direct current.
I have a question in the chat.
Okay, and I got a question. So the question says, for those that can't see it, are you able to use the grid until we are no longer able, then have the solar for use? The answer is yes, but the solar system has to be maintained even though you're not using it. It has to be kept up on. And there are switches that you can have installed that will allow you to switch from one system or the other. So you could have both. How power is measured? To start with, voltage. And for some reason, I didn't choose this, but this is how it is done. The symbol for voltage is E. It should be V for voltage, but I didn't design this. So amperage, and you'll see why this is important in a minute. Amperage is measured in amps, and its symbol is I. And then there's power. This is measured in watts, and its symbol is P, the only one that makes sense. So those three things, voltage, amperage, and power, you need to be able to understand what they are and how they work. And there is one more, but we really, with solar, we don't do much other than kind of need to have a general idea of that it's there, and that is resistance. And resistance is talked of as the load, and it's measured in ohms. So, well, we'll get a little more to that. So let's look at a basic formula. So in electronics or electricity, you learn of this formula as, and I would write this down, P equals IE. That is, the power equals the amperage times the voltage. So the power equals amperage times voltage. So if we take our amperage and we multiply that by our voltage, it tells us how much power or wattage. Because with a solar system, you have a limited amount of power within your storage batteries, and you need to be able to calculate things so that you can size to start with, because step one, when you are going to go set up an off-grid system, whether it's a little tiny system or whether it's a big elaborate system, you have to learn how to calculate how much power, because everybody says, well, what do I need for a system? How big of a system do I need? Well, it all depends upon lifestyle, and it also depends upon, so lifestyle is literally how much you use. Well, how much do I use? Well, I need to know how much I use in wattage, in the power. And so we have this simple formula. And then, of course, with a little bit of algebra, if you see the other two formulas there, E equals P divided by I, and I equals P divided by E. So that's just basic algebra. By the way, that's as deep as we're going to get on algebra. But those are the formulas to be able to calculate those things. So we can figure out like E equals P divided by I. We can say, okay, I need to know what the voltage is. I have a power of so much, an amperage of so much. I can divide the two and come up with the voltage. So that formula pi, you will find that you use that quite a bit in setting up a system, in maintaining the system, and deciphering whether or not, let's say that the wife says, honey, I really need a bigger refrigerator. You're going to be able to get out the calculator and look at the specs on the refrigerator and punch it in and go, I'm sorry, our power system is not going to handle this. Or you can say, well, I'm going to have to add this and this and this to our power system so we can have that refrigerator. That's the purpose behind this. And yes, there are propane. Number one, I would say unless you have a major, huge power system, don't even think about a refrigerator. Even the, quote, energy efficient DC ones, you will find you have a lot of generator time if you do that. Okay, there are two types of electrical power. Two types of electrical power. We have the AC power, which is your grid power, and we have DC power, which is a battery power. And this is where my experience in automotive electrical has helped me, because I've worked with, from the time I was 12, with AC power, grid power, and understanding how the wires are connected and how they work, and yeah, starting from the time I was 18 months, sticking two keys in the socket, I guess, really. Anyway, and then also DC power, which is what your car works with. Alternating current and direct current. Need to understand that, because in a solar system, we use both. Solar panels put out direct current. Wind generators put out direct current. Hydro generators put out direct current. But yet your house uses alternating current. And so somehow we have to get it from from direct current to alternating current so that we can plug in our computer or what other appliance that is in the house. And so we're moving on here. We're covering just a few, like I said, a few things, trying to quite quickly here, and then we're going to get into the more nitty-gritty of the solar system. So electrical concept. We have a plug-in, 120 volt AC. We plug it in, and it goes to something that is called a load. That item that is called a load dissipates the electricity as heat. And that is the way all electrical things work. I don't care if it's your computer. Think about it with your computer. You all have, probably the majority of you have a computer. It gets hot. Even if you have a cell phone and you plug it in, you pick it up and it feels nice and warm, that current is being dissipated as heat. So the load dissipates things as heat. And so that's how it's used. moving on a little bit, electrical measurement. This is one tool that you will need. And I have a sample here of several. There are clamp-on meters. This is an AC clamp-on meter. This will read AC voltage. It will read AC amperage by clamping over a single wire. And I should explain that real quick because this is important. We need to be able to do this. So if we have wires and we run 2 wires through the clamp-on part of the meter, we won't get a reading. We have to only run 1 wire through our meter, and then we can get the reading for it, for picking up the electrical field. They make, this one here is a AC/DC meter. This one will read AC current, DC current, AC voltage, DC voltage. It'll also read ohms or the resistance. So it reads all of those above. And then, just for demonstration purposes, those were digital meters that we were looking at. This is what's called an analog meter. It will measure AC and DC and resistance, but it kind of sort of will do amperage, but not real well. This is not something most of you would ever need or want. Ideally, you want a meter, something like this. It reads AC and DC both. By the way, you don't have to spend $1,000 on a meter, and yes, they get that expensive. This meter was $39 off of eBay. It has worked great. It's probably, I don't know, at least 10 years old, maybe older, and it's still working great. So you can get relatively inexpensive, but it needs to be an AC/DC clamp-on meter so that you can check your system and see what's going on. It's kind of like if you get sick and you put a thermometer in the mouth to know what body temperature it is. This, you might say, is the thermometer of your power system to know what's going on. Either that, or if you don't have one of those meters, you best have a big pocketbook, because you will have to call somebody all the time to have them come take care of your power system, because an off-grid system requires continual attention. I'm talking daily. It has to have, you just don't set it up and go, okay, there we go, we're done with it. We never have to worry about that again. There's daily monitoring that goes on. So let's get a little deeper into this. We have 3 ways of generating power. There's, besides using fossil fuels, solar panels, wind generators. Somebody's put here in the chat, can you give the brand and specs of the meter, please? So, excuse me, I bought this one, this DC AC meter, clamp-on meter, so long ago, I seriously doubt it's available any longer. I would just suggest looking, if you search like eBay or Amazon and you get a clamp-on AC DC meter, volt ohm meter. You want something that's pretty basic. And of course, and maybe what we can do is some more classes. I mean, we could spend an entire class just on using this meter. I mean, I could easily spend 2 hours showing you how to use this meter correctly. And maybe sometime we can get a little more in depth on that. I thought I'd start with intro on all of this. So a clamp-on AC DC meter. Yeah. Okay, you did that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, generating power. Besides using fossil fuels, which we'll talk about those types of generators in a moment, there is solar panels, there is a wind generator, and there's a hydro generator. Hydro generator takes a creek, however you want to say it, and it is by far the most effective, because while you're sleeping at night, that hydro generator is charging batteries for you. Wind generator can be pretty effective, but if the wind stops blowing, you have no power generation. You cannot really use a wind generator alone unless you just happen to be sitting in a spot that the wind never stops. Hydro water turbine, you can use that.
Creek doesn't dry up.
As long as you have, a year-round, not a seasonal creek, you're good to go all the time. I would suggest having at least 2 of these options, if not all 3, if it's optional, if it's possible. And of course, solar panels. Solar panels are great. The only problem is if you have a very cloudy day, if you have a night, which we get those about every approximately 12 hours, we're not generating any power. You generate no power from moonlight. It takes the sun to, and I'm going to back up on that because somebody's going to catch me. You actually can, if it's a full moon and a really bright night, maybe with lots of snow on the ground, you might get a tiny bit of actual power generation, but it is so small, it's virtually insignificant. So you're pretty much reliant upon sunny days. Well, if you don't have sunny days like where we lived, for instance, right here, this is a picture of our home that we had when we lived in Washington State before we moved to Tennessee. And there is, you can see the solar panels in the foreground. For those of you that can see here, there's solar panels on top of the house. And if you look kind of up behind the house to the left of the house, you will see there's actually more solar panels up there, plus a wind generator. And we did all of our publishing from this house off of the second floor, and on a full sunny day with our power system there, we could print all day long, run all of our equipment all day long, and at the end of the day our batteries would be full and we did not run the generator. But we had a lot of solar panels and it came in time. We kept adding to, so we could have less generator time and less expense. So this is was the heart, I guess you could say, of our power system there. Right there in the center, we have the inverter. Off kind of on the right side of that picture, we have charge controllers, we have main breaker systems and other panels for diverting the power and directing it in multiple directions. So, and we're going to get into those a little bit more. Okay. Here is a basic solar system and the components in that solar system. First of all, we have solar panels. Then we have a charge controller. And we're going to go through these and talk about each one here in just a moment. We're getting into the hardcore part of the solar system now. Charge controller. That's, well, we'll get to it. Inverter. An inverter is what takes it from the... I put the inverter on the list first. I should have put batteries first. Anyway, the inverter is what takes it from DC power to AC power so that you can use it in your house. And we'll, of course, talk about all of these. Batteries as part of the system. Then you have a backup generator, which pretty much with all systems you need some kind of backup generator, and again we'll talk about those. Then it goes to the service panel, that's your electrical panel, the breaker box, and then it goes to the load or to the house. So the first question that we usually get is, how many solar panels do I need? I.e., in other words, how big of a system do I need? But the actual bottom line question is, how much is this going to cost me? That's really the heart of the question that people want to know. How much is this going to cost me to do this? And I'm going to tell you, it is lifestyle dependent. When we lived in this house that you see here, for those that could see it, in our house with and the solar panels there, we had what everybody on the hill where we lived called a massive solar system. we had 16 panels here as our main panels, and we had a few more for backup.
They're big panels.
Most of our neighbors had one panel that only put out about half, or that was about a quarter, probably most of them were about the quarter of the size of what one of these panels are, and we had 16 of them.
It's because hippies don't work, and so they never do anything, so they never need anything.
Correct.
They never read,
So
they just exist.
it all depends upon the level of the amount of power. If you want to run your house like you do in the city, being on the power grid, these 16 panels that we had here is only 1/10 of what you would need. I met a doctor, a ER physician, and I got to his house to shear sheep, and I'm looking around and I'm going, wow, you've got a massive solar off-grid system. He goes, yeah. He says, I wanted to be off-grid, and my wife said, yep, that's fine, you can do it, but as long as I can have all the power that I want and live like I want to, you can have your off-grid as long as I have my power. So he had this massive system. I mean, I'm talking panels all over the place. I think there was something like 100, yeah, it looked like a solar farm. I mean, there was over 100 solar panels there. And then he takes me out to his shed, where his shed, it was like a medium-sized garage, and where his backup generator was, this massive diesel generator with a 500-gallon diesel fuel tank. And I said, wow, with all these panels, do you ever use that generator? And he goes, oh yeah. He says, my fuel bill runs about $300 a month for that generator.
They weren't living conservatively.
They were not, exactly. Matt's saying they weren't living conservatively. She had electric dryers and just everything, all of her electrical kitchen appliances, and it was always lots of power.
Didn't she have 2 or 3 freezers, and they're hogs on power?
Two or three electric freezers, and yeah, they're power hogs. So here again, what it comes down to, my point is, you have to decide your pocketbook versus your lifestyle of living is really where the balance comes from. We have a question here. What is the watts on each panel? A lot of solar panels, they all run different wattages. You can buy solar panels from as low as 1 watt per, and here we go with this term I was talking about earlier, wattage or the power. You can buy 1 watt solar panels for a house system or whatever, these little backup things that you can get and whatnot. They might have a 100 watt panel. These panels were 320 watt panels each, and there's 16 of them there.
320.
Yeah, 320 is what was there. So that's 5,000, a little over 5,000 watts that it took to run our house, but that was because we had a full publishing printing system that we were running there that does use, when you run multiple laser printers and bookbinders and whatnot, it takes a lot of power. Okay, so let's go and talk about solar panels. So solar panels, here we go with talking about some of these terms that we used earlier. 12 volt DC, you can get 12 volt DC panels, or you can get 24 volt DC panels. But then you can connect these panels together, depending on what you have for a charge controller, and you can add them up. And there's something, and I didn't put a slide in here for this, but I should talk about it. There is series and parallel when it comes to power. So simply put, series adds. So if we go from the negative to the positive to the negative of the next one to the positive, that's called series, and those add up. That's kind of like if anybody's ever seen Christmas lights, where if one light bulb gets unplugged or burns out, the whole string goes out. That's series. And if you go in parallel, then the power, or the voltage doesn't add. It would if we took 5 panels and put them in parallel together, and they were 12 volt panels, we'd still only have 12 volts. Now the reason that we want to put them in series and increase that voltage is because there's something that's called resistance that we talked about a little bit ago briefly, and here's where it comes to play. So we have the solar panels, like here in the photo, up on the roof, and we have to run the wires down to the charge controller and to the batteries. Well, there is something that's called resistance in those wires. It resists the electron flow through those wires, which will causes power loss in the form of heat out of those wires. And so the lower the voltage we have, the bigger the wires we have, so that we have enough power there. We don't lose so much. We make it easier to get all those electrons through that wire. So for instance, with our house that we had, and the system that we had there, initially we had put panels up on the hill behind the house, and we ran a 12 volt system. So I did a little calculating to figure out what size wire I was going to need to get my 12 volts, the 105 feet down the hill. The wire, one single wire, it took 2, but one single wire was 1.25 inches diameter. Well, when you go to try to buy that wire, that's commercial wire, and I discovered it was about $25 a foot. This was back in 2005, and it was about $25 a foot. And I went, uh-oh, we got a problem, because I was just going to use a old extension cord that was 12 gauge wire and not this really heavy wire down the hill, because I missed that you had to have that big of wire. I figured the smaller would be fine. But when I ran the smaller wire, by the time I started at the top of the hill with my 12 volts and I got down 100 feet later to my solar panels, I only had about 4 volts left, which wasn't enough to do anything. It all dissipated in that wire, one of those learning curves that we had to learn.
Melted snow path.
So you have to size it. But when you increase the voltage, remember I talked about with a power grid system where that's why they do this. The power grid, they generate the power and they run it up to like 70,000 over, sometimes some of the big transmission lines over 100,000 volts. And then they reduce it back down in the substations, and then they reduce it again down, the power down at your power pole that's outside of your house. That's so they don't lose so much power. Otherwise, by the time you got from their generating plant to your house, if they ran it at line current, what we have in our house, you wouldn't have anything left in your house. That's why they go up. So that's what we do with solar. We hook all the panels together and we can run it up there. Sometimes in the big commercial solar farms, they'll run them up there to 5,000 volts before they run them in. Most of the time on a home system, we run it up to somewhere around 100 to 200 volts, that we then run it to our charge controller, and the charge controller then brings that back into the areas where we want. So that's just a little bit about solar panels. Solar panels, specifically, you can get them different voltages and different wattages. When you find a really cheap solar panel, a lot of times what you will find, doesn't have much wattage or power that it capable of putting out, and it also is likely a 12 volt. Well, 12 volts great as long as you're only about 6 to 10 feet from your inverter. If it's all that can be that close together, that works. If you're going to be further away than that, it's going to cost you a lot of money for the wire. By the way, I didn't pay $25 a foot for that wire. Actually found a guy that was a recycler that had it, and I think I paid about $100 for the entire spool, which was about 215 feet that he happened to have, which worked just great for us to have those and to get that massive. There was $500 worth of copper recycling in that wire, but he was helping me out. So anyway, on to charge controllers. A charge controller. What that does is they come in different shapes and sizes. Here's a sample on the screen. We've got Outback. We've got a no-name charge controller. We've got the Xantrex. Outback and Xantrex are both really good ones. Both have been around for a long time. Xantrex has been around. They used to be called Trace. They've changed names, but they're a good one. Outback is a very good one. And also, you see there on the screen that bottom center one, it's a smart solar charger controller. It's a MPPT. And I'm not recommending this smart brand. I just grabbed this as a quick picture offline. But the MPPT is something that you want when you get a charge controller. That is called maximum power point tracking. Maximum power point tracking. And so what that does, and I'm going to try to make it like really simple because there's a whole lot more to this than what I'm sharing. But maximum power point tracking is like this. I was trying to think of the simple way to explain it. So we have our voltage from our panel. We have, let's say, a 12-volt panel. Well, the 12-volt panel actually on a full, bright, sunny day might actually put out 14.2 volts. But our batteries are only needing, at that point in time, 12. So we've got a couple extra volts there. Well, what this maximum power point tracking does is it essentially takes those extra 2 volts and it tucks them away over here to the side and says, as soon as I can get another 2, I'm going to grab those and tuck them over here. And when it adds up to 12, then I'll go ahead and put it back into the system. So that's a really simple way of explaining. It's a lot more technical than that, but that's kind of how it works. Basically, what that's saying is on a day that is not super full bright sun, you can gain power over just a regular charge controller. And so it helps you to get more electricity into your batteries when there's less solar light, sun shining on your panels. Charge control, what it actually does, the charge controller looks at your batteries and it says, is it full? Is it half full? Does it need more? Does it need less? How much does it need? It's kind of like on a car, there's something that's called an alternator. It's what charges the battery for your car. Inside that alternator is something called a regulator. It used to be separate many years ago. Newer cars, it's all built into the one system into the alternator. Usually it's that regulator that goes out when a car alternator fails. But anyway, the regulator, what it does is it's looking at because if you're driving down the road in your car and you're making a long trip and you're driving 12 hours non-stop straight through, and that alternator's spinning, and it's charging, but it's daytime and you're not using any power in the car, that battery is going to get overcharged. And you can only stuff so much power into that battery, and then something's going to happen. It's usually called an explosion. If you don't do something to slow that input down. So we have a regulator, or in the case of solar, we have what's called a charge controller. Charge controllers Matt, can you put that one back up on the screen there? The one on the right there is a very good example. It has those big black fins sticking off of the top. Those are for dissipating heat. And that's exactly what they do. Those little ones in the center, they're for much smaller systems. And they do have some of those type of deals, but it's kind of on their back. But that's how literally the electricity is dissipated, is heat. It's like essentially an electric heater that's using up that extra electricity so you don't overcharge your batteries and cause a problem. That's the big purpose of the charge controller. It monitors your batteries. It says, oh, we need more power in the batteries. So if it's available from the panels, it starts putting it into the batteries. If it's not available, then it can't. And if it's got enough power in the batteries, then it says, well, we need no more power, and it dissipates that extra power as heat. So with that being said, with it dissipating it as heat, you need your equipment in an area that is well ventilated, because it's going to get warm, because it's sometimes, at some times, points in times, it's going to put off heat.
Just the bottom one. I'm taking care of the other.
Okay, so Matt's taking care of about where this is going to be at as far as the link for this presentation. And where did I place my unit? You could do it in lots of different places. Because of lithium batteries, which we're going to talk about batteries in a little bit, because of lithium batteries, it's a little safer to put it inside the house now. It used to be that you always wanted it outside, but yet you cannot allow your batteries to freeze. So they have to be in an area where it can be kept warm enough that they don't freeze, but cool enough that they don't get too hot. And because heat is, Matt, we need power for the transmitting unit, or we're going to lose our power. Heat is an enemy to electronics, and yet all of it puts off heat. And so there's this balance. You want the power system fairly close to your house and system so that you don't have to have great big wires running to it. The inverter. We're going to talk about the inverter, and we're going to talk about how the inverter works. So here again, there's lots of different types of inverters. There's different brands. They range in price from $100 to $5,000. For the average, I suppose you could find some that are even more than that, depending on the level of system. A $100 inverter, if you're going to run nothing more than some little appliance, that would probably be adequate. But if you're going to run a whole house like we did, we actually, this trace inverter that's the picture of there, kind of the bottom right corner, that was what we ran. So now there's another point with inverters. And that is, they put out different types of electricity. They all put out AC. They take in DC current. They put out AC current. Some of the old ones, you can find a really cheap inverter, and it puts out what's called a square wave. Well, a square wave is the type of alternating current form, is the way it converts it. And a square wave kind of looks like a sawtooth when you look at it on an oscilloscope. But the problem with the, okay, are you saying that the charge controller needs to be outside? No, the charge controller needs to be right near the, charge controller needs to be right near the inverter, near the batteries. It all needs to be kept in one location.
We had
I had, on the back of the house, I had a little addition added that that covered it and protected it from the weather. Now that we've got better improved batteries, lithium batteries, those can actually be inside the house. So you could have like a closet or something that you could have your equipment in. It does need to be kept warm and dry. You can't leave it out exposed to the weather, all except for the solar panels. And those you want to keep as close as possible, but needs to be practical too. The inverter. I was talking about the type of wave, a square wave. I mentioned those are the cheap ones. And the problem comes, people see it and go, well, look here, I can get a really big, it says it's 3,000 watt inverter and it's only $199. Well, the problem is it's square wave. So here's what happens. You get your power cord for your cordless battery for your little impact drill or your computer, or you plug in your TV. The TV is the great example because you plug in the TV and to one of these inverters and it will run it, but you have these stupid little lines going across the screen that make it really hard to see what you're looking at. Or when you plug in your battery to charge your cell phone or to charge your computer, suddenly the battery in your computer or phone or your impact go bad. That's because you're using a square wave and it ruins batteries. It creates noise signals. Stay away from them. It's not worth the money. You don't want to go there. Then they have what's called a modified sine wave, which has been electronically smoothed out a little bit. Excuse me. Those are improvement. They probably won't hurt most batteries being charged. What's become more popular and we had a modified sine wave inverter. This trace inverter that I had here on the screen is a modified sine wave. It works for most household items and does pretty well. What it doesn't work for is, like if you have a recording studio or something like that, electronics, it makes a lot of noise, it's static in it and creates problems. But most charge controllers nowadays are what's called pure sine wave, meaning that it's the same thing that you would be getting from the power grid. That's what you want to look for, is that pure sine wave. Pure sine wave is what's important, and the sizing of your inverter. The sizing of your inverter is very important. Again, your panels, your charge controller, your inverter, and the batteries all have to be sized to work together. If you have, we'll go on here to the next one, if you have batteries, and let's say you decide, well, I can't afford but only one battery, so we're just going to get, or like in the picture here, 2 batteries, or actually I think there's 4 there in that picture. So you get a few batteries, but you get a whole bunch of solar panels, but your charge controller can't handle it, so it burns up your charge controller, and then which creates problems with your batteries, and so everything has to work together. And by the way, before we're done, I'm going to give you some places, one in particular that these guys know their stuff. They'll help you design a system. They work with you. But also want to give you some background so that you're not just going into this totally blind, knowing absolutely nothing. But your whole system needs to be working together. So talking about batteries, there are different voltages of batteries. There's 2 volt, there's 6 volt, there's 12 volt, there's 24 volt, there's 48 volt. What do you use? Well, actually, we can use 2 volt, 6 volt, and 12 volt. And usually if you go with a specific, by the way, for those of you that can see this, that great big tall red one, that's a 2 volt battery. And that battery is $1,000. But that battery has a lot of power saved in it so that it can go for a long time. Now, we can't just have one of those because our system is going to require minimally 12 volt, but likely 24. So that means we would need 12 of those batteries if we bought those 2 volters. So now we're looking at $12,000 for batteries. It can be expensive. Don't panic. There are other alternative ways. What about a hybrid system? Charge controller and inverter. Okay, a hybrid system is the one that I said, if you do that, they're good systems, but keep in mind, so a hybrid system, that is a grid tie system. It's another name for it. You don't have any batteries, so you have no batteries to maintain. That's wonderful. And as you have sunshine, you're using power. So during the day, you're using power, and or in some systems, it'll actually spin your meter backwards, meaning that the power company is literally paying you for the power you're generating, which is all wonderful. But if the power grid goes down, your system goes down because you have no batteries and no backup for it. So my personal opinion is don't waste your money on a hybrid or a grid tie system. If you do go that route, make sure that you get an electrician to install it so you don't end up killing somebody. Because it's got to be done right. The other worst case scenario, you might catch your system if you wire it wrong and you mess it up. You might ruin some equipment. You might burn your building down that you had in it or whatever. And you may be injured, but you may not be killing other people. So it can be bad if you don't do it right, but it can be really bad if it's a grid tie hybrid system. But keep in mind that the hybrid systems are no help to you if the grid goes down. Okay, talking back to batteries. A golf cart battery is actually where we started. They're about the cheapest form. You can go pretty much to any auto supply, pick up a golf cart battery under $200. That's a 6-volt battery. So if you have a 12-volt system, meaning your inverter is designed for 12 volt input power, you'll have to have 2 of those golf cart batteries connected in series, so 6 and 6 is 12, to add up that system. So literally you could have your 2 batteries, $400, you could have batteries, and you could have a basic solar system, 2 batteries, charge controller, a small inverter. I mean, you could do it fairly cheaply. A method that's recommended. Oh, another step. Okay, so on this picture here, I had up at the top, I have a battery it says it's Renewable is the brand here on it. I'm not picking or saying anything negative against them for that, but that is a lead acid battery. That battery weighs just shy of 400 pounds. It puts out about 200 amp hours. Here we go again with those numbers. That's why I said it's a 12 volt battery, puts out about 200 amp hours. Thank you, dear. So it puts out about 200 amp hours at 12 volts. But with a lead acid battery, there's one thing that you need to know. The golf cart battery is a lead acid battery. This particular Renewable is a lead acid battery. A lead acid battery, you can, so at 50% of charge, so we take that battery fully charged, we drop it down to 50%. That is considered empty. We can't go below that. If we do go below that, your charge controller and your inverter can be kind of set to help limit, so it doesn't do that. But if you go below that, that lead acid battery creates what's called a memory, And then it thinks that 50%, half full, is full, and it keeps dropping that down lower and lower. So then you have less storage. So you go, oh, I don't understand. We used to be able to run the lights all evening, and we had no problem at all. And now in 30 minutes, we're out of power, and so we got to go start the generator so that we can have power for the rest of the evening. That's because the battery got run too low. It has a memory, and too many times that happened, and so it okay, I'll get to that question in a moment. So the battery has creates that memory, and it cannot come back at full, so it has that full reserve. I'll use this, my glass of water here as an example. So I got a full glass of water. But once it's down near the bottom, and I'm really thirsty, and I go to get a whole drink, it's only just a little bit at the bottom. And that's kind of the way the battery is. There's only a little at the bottom. And so you don't have that much available, so then you end up with more generator time. But along came lithium batteries, and lithium batteries are awesome. They take less maintenance. They're a whole lot lighter. This, go ahead and put the picture back up, Matt. The Life or the Lifey Pro or Life Pro that's there, lifetime battery. It says nothing's lifetime. Well, I guess when its life is over, it's done, but. It's not forever. Nothing's forever, except for maybe heaven. Anyway, but this is also a 200, shows right there, it's a 200, 12 volt, 200 amp hour, 12 volt battery. Same as the one above it. It only weighs about 40 pounds, so it's much, much lighter. And the good thing there is this battery is... it is capable of being drawn clear down to 0, not 50% full, but 0. When it hits right at that point, there's circuitry built into those batteries that just says, that's it. And by the way, a lead acid battery, the way they work is they start out full, and they start out putting out full power, but as they go, they just gradually a little less, a little less, a little less, a little less, a little less. So the system gets, so it doesn't work as well, and it gets down to that 50% point, and if you don't shut it off, it'll just keep on gradually going down till nothing. Where the lithium, it puts out, and it just puts out nice and even, nice and even, nice and even, the same amount, same amount, same amount, same amount, done. And it shuts off. And so it makes your system run a whole lot easier, a whole lot better. So here is, put that full screen, Matt, so hopefully they can see it better. Here is I picked on that Renewable and that lifetime battery. The Renewable 200 amp hour 12 volt battery off of Amazon, currently $379. The lithium, $569. So it is more money.
You get what you pay for.
But yeah, you get what you pay for. And of course then that 2 volt, I was wondering why it was looking like it's looking over there on your screen. It doesn't look like that on mine. No, it's moved things around funny there for some reason. Anyway, that 2 volt battery is a $964. And that was one I just picked up offline this morning, found it and said, oh, okay, there's a comparative option. It could be a good option if you've got a big billfold. It won't be when you get done putting that system together, but it can give you a lot of power. So we're going to move on because we're still doing some general things. Oh, and I had this question. Somebody's very interested in hybrid. Hybrid inverter is what I use It's a all-in-one inverter. Yes, they do that often. It can run on or off grid. We just connect the grid side to a generator. Okay, so I'm going to say yes and no with that. You may have some power if you have a sunny day if the grid is down, but if it's nighttime and the grid is down, you have no power. Unless you use a backup generator that you tie into that, which means you're reliant on fossil fuel of some sort, propane, diesel, gasoline. The problem there comes, how much of that can you store? How independent do you want to be? So yeah, it's all-in-one inverter because there really isn't a charge controller. Because there's nothing to control for batteries, because there's no battery that you're doing it. You're just putting power into the grid system, getting some credit for that, and then you are being able to, so you're saving yourself some money. It can be kind of help you save some money. It doesn't help you with any independence. Backup generators. Next step on the list. So as we see our diagram here, we've got the backup generator feeding into the inverter. Part of the circuitry in the inverter is literally like a battery charger that takes that power from the generator, converts it to DC power, and puts it into the batteries so that then you can take power out of the batteries and run it into your system. And when you're running a backup generator, your inverter also just flips a switch, and so not only is it charging your batteries, but while the generator's on, it's also just looping through it and running the power from the generator to your service panel, giving you power to your breaker box. So generators, what do I use? What do I use for a generator? You can go to different places. You could buy, like for here, I've got some examples. You can get an 8,000 watt or a 10,000 watt Champion. They're pretty cheap. Those, by the way, are either a square sine wave or a modified sine wave. You probably modified sine wave. One thing I've learned, if you give a welder generator, for those guys that know what those are, a welder generator, do not charge your batteries off of that welder generator unless it is an inverter welder generator, because you will ruin your batteries. But here's the thing, the basic thing about generators. Most generators are what are termed screamers. The generator, the DeWalt that's here in this picture, the Champion, those generators are a 3450 RPM generator, meaning that the engine runs at 3,450 RPMs, revolutions per minute, to put out that power. They are fuel hogs because they're running so fast to put out that power. If you try to slow the engine down, which most of them are regulated so that you have to like severely manipulate them to slow it down, you will discover that they don't put out proper power because they don't put out enough voltage, and it creates a problem. So these things are a very expensive way of charging your batteries. And most of them are built to only run for anywhere between 300 to 600 hours. And then the internal components are done. They're designed that way by the manufacturers so that you will buy a new one. Now, the average person who buys a backup generator so that they have a generator to use when a tree falls on a power line and they're out of power for 6 hours or 12 hours, they get out their generator, start it up, and they run out a few extension cords and plug in their TV and their refrigerator, and they think they're living in comfort because they have their backup generator. Most of the time, though, they'll discover that the backup generators being gasoline, if they've used it before and they didn't properly drain and shut things down, it's not going to want to start for them anyway. But if it does start and run for them, because they did things right.
If there's a lot of power down, TV ain't gonna work anyway.
Yeah, if there's a lot of power shut down, then there won't be any broadcast signals, so you won't have anything anyway. But, so these generators are not very fuel efficient. Okay, you know what, your questions with the solar hybrid system, I'm going to say let's put those on hold until we
It's
get
not solar hybrid. It's someone else.
solar. Let's put those questions on hold until we get to the end, and I'm going to try to get there, and then we're going to open it up for questions. I'm not on too big of a time restraint. I do have other things I need to do today, but we'll take time and answer questions. Looking at a 6.5, okay. Okay, so one of the things, and they're kind of asking there on the generator about that. So one of the things that happens, for instance, this Champion generator is a prime one that does this. A lot of these brands do this. In fact, if you can see it there well enough, you'll see it says 10,000 watt, but if you look, there's smaller print, 8,000, and then there's a 7,250, I think it is, or something down there. It's too small for me to see on my own screen. Anyway, so here's what happens. They rate generators in peak wattage, meaning the most they can put out, but the problem is they can only put that out for a short amount of time. Like when you plug in a skill saw and you turn it on, it could put out a lot of power for a short amount of time to get that motor running. Once it's running, it doesn't take as much power to run, and so therefore, then it can handle running it. So you may buy like a 13,000 watt generator and discover that it's only capable of running 6,000 watts. But in reality, you don't even need that much. I want to talk a little more about generators here on another aspect or area of that. This Honda generator that I have in the picture, it's a little Honda EU 2200 I. That little I is very, very important. That is inverter. That means that generator is a pure sine wave generator.
You can plug your smartphone in that.
You can plug smartphones into it and your computers and whatnot. Things will work well, charge well, your batteries for your tools. It also is a very quiet generator. The reason we call these other generators screamers is because they run at that high RPM and they're very loud. This Honda runs real quiet because it is a 1800 RPM, revolution per minute, generator. So it runs a lot slower. Therefore, it uses a lot less fuel. And it, through the inverter technology that they run, without going into deep detail onto it, that then will give you the, and this EU gives you 2200 watts of power, so a much smaller one, and you have 2200 watts. That 2200 watt generator will charge most medium-sized power systems quite effectively, very quietly, quite cost-effectively. And I was just looking at questions. I was debating where to go here. I think what I'll do is, so that's a good one as far as a option. But I'm going to show you something that I like even better here in a moment. One of which is this other picture that's on here. Go ahead and bring that back. If in the bottom right corner there, you'll see for those of you that are more technical, mechanical, you'll see an engine with what looks like a car alternator, and that's because it is. That right there, we learned early on.
Got it bolted to a 2x12.
And yeah, I literally bolted it to, Matt remembers it.
I do.
I bolted the engine to a 2x12, And I bolted the alternator to some wood blocks that were mounted to that 2x12 because I wasn't sure if it was going to work. And I started that engine up, and I got out my clamp-on amp meter, and I put it over the wires, and with a little fiddling with that alternator, I did what they call full fielding it so that that alternator puts out its full power. And I played with the throttle on the engine until I got it setting where it was running, where I knew that alternator was at its max and not doing too much. And I brought that down just as that peak. I think it was a 62 amp alternator. So just as it started to go from 62, I'd slow that engine down, slow it down, slow it down. It was staying right at 62. And all of a sudden it goes 61, 60, boom, stopped right there. So I let it put out 60 right there, just right at its top. That engine was idling to do that because of the way I designed my pulleys on it. And literally that 1.5 gallon tank of fuel on that, because all I was doing was charging batteries with this, putting power into my batteries. That little 1.5 gallon tank would literally run usually between 8 and 9 hours. Whereas on my big generator, like the Champion, or actually I had it was a different brand, but it had a 6 gallon fuel tank, and I got 4.5 hours out of 6 gallons. So 4.5 hours of listening to that screaming machine for 6 gallons of fuel versus not being able to hear the engine running inside the house and getting 8 or 9 hours out of 1.5 gallons of fuel. Way more cost effective, much less expense if you can build it yourself. Yeah, it doesn't look as fancy, but if you can build it yourself, and this guy that did this when I pulled this picture offline, because I don't think I've got a picture of I wasn't into taking pictures of what I'd done, I just did it. Anyway, so that thing just sat there and idled, and that engine ran and ran and ran and ran and never ever gave us any problems. It worked awesome. But we eventually did go to what I have right here. Go ahead and bring that one up, Matt. This is an Onan 4,000 watt RV genset. Well, these generators,
Mark?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, but how many of those screamers did we go through in how many years? Because they burn out.
Too many.
So we bought a lot of generators before you did the
Yes.
trip on the one you just talked about and then went to the Onans.
Okay, and somebody asked a question, lawnmower engine. Yes, if it is a horizontal crankshaft. Most lawnmowers are a vertical crankshaft, or the pulley would be vertical. I suppose you could run it that way. It'd just be harder to do it that way, but if it's a horizontal shaft, like what you'd see on a rototiller, those work better. The other style would work. I mean, literally, you could, your own imagination, you could take a lawnmower engine that's a vertical crankshaft, and you could direct couple your alternator right to it, hanging off the bottom. It's possible, and it would work. It would actually work quite well. Just a little more fabrication engineering, just depends on your abilities. Of course, keeping in mind, all of these generators take some sort of fuel backup. So we want that as little as possible because, number one, gasoline you can't store very long. Diesel will store a little longer, but it still has and you can only store so much. And then there's propane that you could run. You could do natural gas. Some people have said, oh, I'm just going to have a natural gas one because, well, guess what? This last winter in southeast Washington, somebody was doing some excavation and they ran into the main gas line, and for 2 weeks the natural gas was shut off to entire cities. So you can't count on it. By the way, if we're under attack from some other country or whatever, they're going to attack our power grid and our gas lines and fuel and whatnot. So okay, question, pressure washer with a horizontal crankshaft. Yes, that would work. The horizontal makes it easy because, I mean, literally, you don't have to be as fancy as I was with the picture I had here. Like I said, when I mounted it, I bolted it to a 2x12. I did find when I used lag bolts, it didn't hold. They wobbled out quite quick with the vibration. And the board kept running around. We had to pile some rocks on the board to keep it from vibrating around. But
the generator runs off. You got
but
problems.
yeah, when the generator, because we'd hook it up and the engine would be sitting there bouncing, and it'd just go like this and keep just and just start running away until it got to the end of the wires, and it actually broke a wire one time. I mean, we had all kinds of fun with those. This little generator that I brought up here, this is for an RV, really, really popular back in the 80s and 90s in motorhomes. So you can find somebody with a motorhome, and by the way, they rarely got used for very much. So these things, the last one I bought, it had 200 hours on it. These things are considered a continuous run generator. That is something also different with like your generator from Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever, the screamers. Those generators are on a time limit. They run out. They're only so many hours and they're done. By the way, you can use one of those generators that has the generator portion has quit. It's a little harder because the shaft coming out of the engine is tapered, so it makes it really hard to fabricate a pulley on it. It's possible. I've actually done that. That was our second one that we did with an alternator. But these little generators that the Onan, they're 1800 RPM, and so they're a slow run. They're designed to be a continuous run, so they will just sit there and putter away for hours and hours and hours. This particular one I just picked up off of eBay this morning. I didn't buy it, I just snagged the picture of it. $500 somebody's asking for that. It's in, where does it say? Oh, it isn't showing me there, and I didn't save it. So anyway, you can find these things in different applications, secondhand things and whatnot. The one thing these don't have is a fuel tank, so you have to set up, because they usually come off of the vehicle fuel tank, so you have to set up a fuel tank. By the way, these are also easily convertible to propane. So you could have a 500-gallon propane tank sitting there and propane doesn't go bad. So really nice option for a backup generator. Makes it, it's very quiet. They don't use near so much fuel. This does use more fuel than does the little lawnmower engine, pressure washer engine. It does use more fuel than those do, but it also is putting out power. The other thing that we did that we discovered was a mistake. I decided that we needed a larger generator for powering everything. This was early on in our experience of living off-grid. And I found a Y2Ker that was more than willing to sell their 12,000 China diesel engine generator system. It was huge. It was really huge. And it filled the back of my pickup. It wasn't real noisy. It was an 1850 RPM machine. But the issue that we had with it is fuel consumption. The thing drank like a drunken sailor. I mean, it had I think it was a 12-gallon fuel tank, and it lasted about 6 hours. So it just like sucked the fuel through. And they say China diesel engines are really fuel efficient. Well, compared to in what perspective? We were used to our system that was running the little lawnmower engine. So it was, for us, not very effective. Plus, we also discovered we hardly ever needed that much power. You just turned something off. It was way more power than we ever needed. And I was looking for a bigger one yet. I was thinking a 20 kW, 20,000 watt generator would even been better, but then realized no. This little 4,000 watt Onan, it did anything that we needed. Okay, did I miss the answer of the usable lifespan of the homemade generator? Okay, so the generator that you would buy at like Lowe's, Home Depot, just the Screamers, the DeWalt brand, the Champion brand, the whatever other brand, lifespan on those are anywhere between 300 to 600 hours. If you are living in a backup generator system and it's winter time, I promise you, you won't make it through the winter and that generator will be done. So you will be feeding that thing fuel like crazy and your generator will have quit. And I had one that actually, it quit in 3 months. I had a 1-year warranty. I took it back and they go, you've got 680 hours on this machine. We can't warranty it. And I said, why not? It's a 1-year warranty. Well, the warranty also was limited to 500 hours, whichever came first, 1 year or 500 hours. So I spent $900 for a generator that was now a pile of junk. I checked to see if I could get parts to fix it myself. It was going to cost me $800 to buy new parts. So we just bought a different generator. So anyway, that's why you look for alternative. And like this little Onan setup, that thing will run hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours and never complain until somebody dumps sugar in your gas tank like they did to us. Okay, we're going to move on. We're almost to the end of this part, and then I'm just going to open things up for questions. So service panel is our next one. So we've got all of our power. It comes out of our inverter, and it goes to what we're used to seeing as a breaker panel, to our power panel, which then takes it out, the load, to the house. So literally, that's the end of what I put together as a kind of a basic introduction to the system. I wanted to talk briefly about sizing, appliance sizing. Melanie, if you can hear me out there, can you bring me, I don't care, the Vitamix or a bread machine mixer, or I don't care, something, some kitchen appliance that's electric.
I think she was using the blender.
Yeah, I hear her coming. So let me get the computer out of the way.
So it's wet.
We thought you were using that.
I was in the
Yeah.
bathroom.
Oh,
I took it in the bathroom so it wouldn't be noisy.
okay. So we've got the kitchen appliance, the Vitamix. And to use that. But on the back of this thing, and I'm going to just stick it right out here in front of the camera. It's not focusing real well on it. But anyway, there we go. There, it did it. Okay, we've got this label. That label is a big help. Now, I know I wasn't holding it real still, but I'm just going to look at it here. So it says 120 volt, 50/60 hertz. That's the frequency. We don't get into much of that. We run 60 hertz here in America. But then it says 11.5 amp. 120 volts, 11.5 amp. So here's where our mathematics formula, our pi formula, comes in that we talked about earlier. So we take 120 and we multiply that by 11.5. That means this blender uses 1,380 watts of electricity. And our solar system is all rated in with wattage usage. In fact, actually, so is your grid power. When you pay for your power on your power bill, it's rated in kilowatts, which is 1,000 watts, kilo 1,000. So it's rated in kilowatts, and you pay so much per kilowatt that you use. So you have this blender. So we use 1,380 watts. So in order to run this blender, I need an inverter that's larger than 1,380 watts. If I have an inverter that's a 500 watt inverter, just a little one, it's going to go and the blender's not going to do anything because it can't do it. Okay, let's see here. I was looking at a question. We have 1,000 hours on our 3,500 watt inverter generator. Inverter generator is the key there. We only do short runs, about 1 hour at a time, to charge up batteries. So, inverter generators last. It's not a screamer. So that is a very good thing. And yes, they will run and run and run because they run slower and they definitely work better. So the little Honda EUs or those comparable to that are a real huge blessing when it comes to that type of thing. So what you got to do when you're sizing your system, you go through and you look at appliances. Now, a Vitamix we only use for a short amount of time. We turn it on, we may run it for 30 seconds, a minute, maybe even 4 minutes or something if we're doing a bigger project with it, and it's shut off. So we're using a fairly large amount of power for a short duration, which works pretty good. And if we've got an inverter big enough to run that, we're okay. Now, this is called a wall wart. It's, for those of you that are on by phone that can't see it, it's one of those little deals that's like a little, you plug it into the wall and it's this little bump, or sometimes it's in the middle of the cord, a bump in the middle of the cord that where it gives power, or we all have them for our mobile phone devices, the little cubes that we plug. Those are all called wall warts as a generic name. And for instance, this little guy I've got here, this is, its input is 120 volts, and it uses, they calculated it for us, it uses 6.5 watts. Now, something that most people don't understand, when you have one of these devices plugged in, even if, like this thing right here, I have nothing here to plug into it right here in this room. If I were to plug this in and put a meter on it, I could show you that it is using 6.5 watts, even though it's powering nothing. So any electronic device, any wall wart, any TV, any radio, any electronic device, microwave, the clock this on your range, if you have that, even if you have a gas range, but you have it's electric, it's got the timer and the clock things and whatnot on it, those are all using power all the time. So if we take this 6.5 watts and we add it up to a few more things, we end up with a lot of power usage that's doing nothing for us. So in other words, you either put in a lot of power strips that you can shut off when you're not using that appliance, or you unplug it from the wall. We all get, when you leave a room, when you live off grid and you leave a room, you shut the lights off. You don't leave the lights on where you are not at, because unless you have a massive system, you will be doing a lot of generator time. There was a lady home where I went several years ago that she had lights on all over the place. She was off grid entirely, no power to her property from the utility grid, and she ran her generator roughly 7 hours out of every single day. and went through gasoline and went through gasoline for her generator, and she ran a screamer, as one of those, as I've been terming them, one of the 3450 run that's not efficient, fuel efficient, and they just run and run and run, make a lot of noise and power. And she asked me, how come I am always having to run my generator all day? And I looked around and I said, you have every light on in the house. She goes, yeah. And I said, that takes power. It's pulling it off of your batteries. You're using more than... And I said, is that refrigerator electric like I think it is? And it was this big beast of a refrigerator. And she goes,
2 doors.
yeah, it was a double door up top and drawers down below. And I said, that right there is your problem. Oh no, she says, when I bought that, they told me it was an energy efficient refrigerator. It's like, okay, yes, I agreed. They do make energy efficient refrigerators. The problem is, energy efficient refrigerators typically don't work on even off-grid systems because they are a constant, almost constant electrical pull, and they use an incredible amount of power, and that was her problem. I actually proved it to her. I said, let's unplug your refrigerator for 4 hours, and let's see how your power system does. At the end of 4 hours, her system, and we turned off a few lights, her system was still full and wasn't down. Well, she decided that she'd rather use the gasoline than get rid of her large refrigerator. So, you know, that was the option. But if she couldn't have bought gasoline, she'd have had a problem. So here again, it all comes back to lifestyle level of dependence as to what you need. She could have put in a system that would have been big enough to handle that. She'd have needed about 20 times what she had to be able to power that refrigerator effectively. So anyway, I want to open it up for questions. I know I have only given you a heavy dose of an introduction for it, and I may not have answered all questions. So either in the chat or you can unmute and ask questions. And while we're waiting for somebody to jump in there, do I recommend living off-grid? Yes. Currently, we are on-grid. I hate it. I thought it would be nice because of the printing to have. And I am thoroughly convinced. In fact, I'm looking right now at trying to situate ourselves in a different place where we can go back off grid. I'm going to build myself another system again because I just got a $300 electric bill this month, and I'm done. I'm done. I can build a system but the one thing about it, when you go off grid, you've got to be continually watching and maintaining your system. Where's my battery voltage? Do I need to start the generator? Unless you have a fully automated system, but then you still have to monitor it. Anyway.
Question?
Yes.
Sorry to have to repeat some, but had to leave the room here a couple of times, and I missed the conclusion of when you were saying that the streamers are inefficient with money. What was your answer? Just give me the real short version.
The answer is either my preference is the Onan generator, like out of an RV. I mean, you can buy them new, but unless you've got a lot of money, you know, you can spend $5,000-6,000 for one of those new, or you can pick one up for $300 to $600 used.
Okay.
And the little Onan.
Yeah, I heard that part.
The Onan generators. The other thing, of course, is if you want to just use something to charge batteries, you have to build them. You can't buy them, but you can build with a gasoline engine and like a car alternator for charging batteries. That's
Recommend anchoring the board to something too.
yeah, anchor the board down. Well, actually, what we did later on was I used the engine from one of those screamers. I fixed it so I could control the throttle, idled it down, ran it, put an alternator in there, and we actually, because we didn't have anything to bolt it to, it sat outside. I stacked a bunch of rocks on it, and that worked quite effectively. Sat there and idled away, and was very cost effective for running. I'm
Hey, Mark,
yes.
I want to thank you so much. The information you shared has just been right on point, just needed at this time. My wife and I are looking at a system. Is it all right if I just give you the four line specs on it, and you kind of just give me an overview on what you think of it?
Sure, because that could be helpful not only for you but for others.
Okay, thank you. So it's starting with the inverter. It's a 6.5 kilowatt solar hybrid inverter charger, and it says it's 13 kilowatt continuous and 26 kilowatt peak. And the company I'm buying from said I would need two of those.
Oh, okay. Okay, depending on what you're wanting to do with your home, the reason you would need two is because if you connect them in parallel, working beside each other, because each one will put out 120 volts AC. So technically speaking, then you could run your electric range or your electric hot water tank off of that generator, or that, not generator, but that inverter system. The problem comes, how big of a battery bank system do you have in conjunction with that? Because,
So that's going to be the next line.
okay,
So I have lithium ion phosphate battery bank. That's 15.5 kilowatt hours storage. The storage EVE 31 kilowatt hours, and they were going to get me two of those.
that's a big system. Okay.
Okay.
What about solar panels?
So solar panels were 24 of them, and it's 410 watt monocrystalline panels.
Yeah, that's just shy of 10,000 watts of solar input, which is, it sounds like what they have done is they've sized you for a almost, not quite, but almost on grid. You couldn't run a hot water tank or electric range or electric dryer off of that, at least for any length of time, without having to do a lot of backup generator time. Yeah, I just was reading a note here. I'll share that to everybody in a moment. Anyway, those type of things, the large appliances, electric range, electric dryer, electric hot water tank, those have to go away. Sounds to me like, yeah, you want a propane hot water tank and or a system setup, which we could talk. I could spend 2 hours sharing with you the hot water system that we had in our house. We heated our water without any circulating pumps, and we heated it from our wood stove about 7-8 months out of the year. The rest of the time of the year, it was used with a propane hot water, and only because we didn't want to heat the house up to heat our water when we lived off grid. So that is, those large appliances, they just go. Our dryer was clotheslines that were hung across the living room ceiling and outside when the weather permitted. The range was propane, or my wife cooked on the top of the wood stove during the winter time, which was just a great big monster stove. Maybe we could do a share on that at some point for alternative things there. The The heat was wood. Yeah, you don't run an electric furnace or anything like that on it. Even okay, so we just on a house that, because I'm a contractor, and the house that we're working on, we just put in. I had a HVAC system put in on the house, and I had to run 8-gauge wire with a 45 amp breaker, and it is a natural gas furnace. So that furnace requires, with the amount of electricity, upwards close to probably 40 amps of power to run it. That so 40 amps, if we take, and that's 240 volts times 40 amps, that's 9,600 running watts to run that furnace. It's a lot of electricity to run that natural gas furnace. It's just not practical if you live off-grid.
So, Mark, if I may add this piece of info, so this system that I just broke down to you,
Uh-huh.
we are actually going to be in the South Caribbean islands, so we don't have to deal with heat or anything because of the tropics, and but might not even need hot water when you think about it. So it is a big system, as you said, but we just wanted to make sure that we size it right so that we don't ever have to deal with even a generator, because with this size of system and the full sun that is available almost every day, even in the rainy season, we can see that the system will be, batteries will be recharged in 3 to 4 hours, and the rest of the day is just free energy, if you may call it that.
Yes. My personal thought on that one is the salesman is trying to make a lot of money off of you with a system. Yes, very large system. It would work well. There's no argument on that. You will have way more power than I think you would ever be able to use. You could probably cut that system in half and discover that you would still have adequate power to do what you need to do. Are you running like a well or a pump or anything like that? A deep well pump with that?
Yeah, it would be a shallow well pump from the rain harvesting tank system to pump it up to the floor that, where you have batteries and all that.
Okay.
But even that is not being used much because of the 30-gallon pressure tank that's attached. So the pump is really not going to run as often.
Yeah. Well, a 30-gallon pressure tank actually only has, you might be surprised, about 1/3 of that is actually water. The rest is air to build your pressure. So you have about 10 gallons of water in that pressure tank. If you don't want it to run very often, you might want to think about a larger pressure tank, like a 60 or an 80 even gallon, because it's roughly about 1/3 of that tank is water, 2/3 is air. That's to give the cushion so that it gives for building the pressure in that pressure tank. You can also go with a pump that is what they call a soft start. Requires less electricity to start up. It doesn't require that initial big power surge. The pumps are a little more expensive, but they're much more cost effective to run. Somebody here on the chat,
Mark?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the phone number is there, it's yours. I don't want to hog the line, so I would give you a call, because this is great information that you're sharing, and I won't mind talking with you on one-on-one offline.
Okay.
But before I do, in case anybody else wants to have that question on my system, I just wanted to know, with the inverter, where it says 13 kilowatt continuous and 26 kilowatt peak, what does that mean, and is that good to have or too much?
Okay. So the 13 kilowatts, so that would be 1,300 watts kilowatt, 1,300 watts, no, that'd be 13,000. 13,000 watts. That's a massive
Yes.
inverter. 13,000 watts. That's a massive inverter. Let me give you an example for comparison purposes. Our inverter, well, first of all, before I go there, let me explain the run versus the peak. Run is what it's designed to run continuously, in that case, 13 kW or 13,000. Peak is for those surges, like when you start a motor, like when the pump comes on. If you have a standard, in your case, like a shallow well pump, that motor comes on. An electric motor takes a large amount of power to get running. Once it's running, then it kind of backs off and doesn't take as much. So that's for that surge peak, which is plenty. Let me give you an example of what our system was there in Washington that we had. When we left there, our inverter was 4,200 watts. Not 13,000, but 4,200. Surge on it, I believe, I'm going by memory, I think it was like 6,000 was the surge, and it would hold that for like 20 seconds or something like that. It's always really short amount of time. But it was for the basic practical purposes, 4,200 watts. Now, what did we run off of that? We ran a 3,000 square foot house. We had LED light bulbs throughout the house. We had no large electric appliances, although my wife had the Vitamix, she had her Bosch bread machine. We had the main thing that was our electrical consumption in our house. Of course, we had the toaster, and we had the... We did toast on top of the stove a lot, especially in the wintertime. But our big electrical consumption was the printing ministry, because we're also a printing publishing ministry. And we ran a glue binder, which pulls, I don't have the specs in my head, but it pulls a lot of power. We ran the glue binder. We ran commercial laser printers. At that point, I think we had 3 of them that we would run simultaneously. We would, at any given point, we'd have 3 to 5 computers running because of that printing process. We would have joggers for the paper. It was our ministry that was the machine for punching the holes for the spiral binds and whatnot. And so we had all of that. And I see a question here that I can share right with us. What would you recommend for refrigeration and washing machine, since electric is not recommended? Okay, so refrigerator, that's simple. They make propane refrigerators. Do not get suckered into buying a 12-volt energy-efficient refrigerator, unless you are building a system like this gentleman that was just talking with us with his massive system. His system would handle a 12-volt refrigerator likely without any problems at all, especially with the amount of sun that he's going to be in the area he's going to be at. That is also something you have to keep in mind. You have to look at where you live. If you're on the coast, way up north, you're going to have a whole lot less sun, but you're going to have more wind. So you could supplement that with wind for adding your power, because solar panels alone aren't going to be enough to handle you unless you have way more of them. So when you do get sun, you can charge a lot in that short amount of period of sun that you have. If you're in an area where you have lots of sun every day, all day long, and you're charging all day long, the majority of the time, you don't need as many panels. So the system needs to be sized for what you're doing. Washing machine. We actually ran, we started out with a very energy efficient machine that we purchased. It was a rather expensive machine, but it was quote super energy efficient for off-grid purposes and whatnot, it didn't really work. It used almost as much power as a regular machine that you'd gone and bought from a regular appliance place. And so what we did in the early on days, when we had a really small system, we had a 2,000 watt inverter, and it was enough. It would run the washing machine, but our batteries wouldn't hold it very long. We only had 6 golf cart batteries when we started out, so it was a very, very small system. What we would do is we'd start the generator, the screamer that we had, and we would use that to run the washing machine through the power system, and it would also charge our batteries at the same time. So especially in the winter time, during the summertime it wasn't quite so bad. We had more sun where we were at, and as long as Melanie spread out, she didn't do washing day, she did washing week, because it was one load today, one load tomorrow, kind of scattered out. Oh, the sun's shining, let's do a load of laundry. But we discovered we went to just a standard washing machine, what they called energy efficient from the appliance store.
That was after we tried one of the front loads, and the
Yes.
front loads lock you out if your power is not
Adequate. Yeah, we had all kinds of
high
troubles
enough.
with a front load on our off-grid system.
You rated up, so
We had all kinds of issues with that one. But so we just went to a standard, basic, top load, a little more energy efficient machine. We tried to either use the generator running to charge the batteries when we needed it while she was doing a load of laundry, or we did it when the sun was shining.
Then I would hang everything to dry,
Yes, that
because
was the
dryers
dryer.
take so much power.
Yeah, you can't.
So, and
even a
I would
gas.
much rather hang them to dry. They turn out so much nicer than the dryer. It just eats your clothes up, taking all the lint and.
Yes, and the gas dryers still take a lot of electricity, even though they're being heating by gas. And if you live out on the east end of the country where the humidity is high, and you use a gas dryer, your clothes will never get dry, because natural gas and propane put out a lot of water with their heat, and so it's a wet, moist heat. You're better off to hang it up. Somebody asked here for the fellow that has that large 13,000 watt inverter he's looking at, what the cost of that inverter, massive inverter, is. And I'm going to go on here. Maybe he'll get us, he can look that up and find out, get an answer for those that were asking.
Brother Mark, I'm going to have to go, but I have a couple of questions if you can answer for me quickly.
Okay.
Now, if you had to go average on some things, like which would be the best one to go average on and try to get the best out of these equipment that you would need, out of the solar panel, the inverter, the battery, the generator, the charge controller? What do you think you need the best of on those, and the other ones you can go rather average on?
In my opinion, your batteries and your inverter is kind of the heart of the system.
Okay.
That's really the big heart of the system. You don't have to necessarily go with a high-end battery. You could get if you get the inverter so that it's capable of doing more, then you can expand. You can add another charge controller or get a bigger one. You can add more batteries. You can add more solar panels and build your system and make it bigger as you go. Your inverter is going to be, the inverters and the batteries are your most expensive part of your system. And so, but the batteries you can add to. The inverter, you've got what you've got, unless you just sell it and go with another one. And as that fellow that was talking about 2 inverters, most systems, most average systems, you don't need 2. 1 is plenty adequate because you don't need to run, the reason you run 2 is so that you can have 240 volt power in your house. You really don't need 240 volt. Anything that runs off of that is considered the large appliances, which use a large amount of power. You need to be looking at other alternative ways for doing that.
Okay. Well, what is bulk absorb float in terms of the battery?
What? Oh, bulk.
Have you heard those terms?
Bulk absorb.
Have you heard? Yes, bulk absorb and float.
Okay, and float. Okay, so the bulk absorb is the time that it's ratings for the battery so that you can, and also the inverter is set to do those. Most of that is pretty, it's one of those things you set it and kind of leave it as far as with the inverter, but the purpose behind those, they kind of make a big deal out of them. It's really how much power can you put in the battery at what rate, and at what voltage is that battery designed to go to float. In other words, if you said somebody was just kind of floating along in life, you'd say they were doing nothing. Okay, that's a battery. It's not really being charged, it's just kind of floating along. At what voltage do we put it into that float mode? Different batteries are designed to go into that float at a different point. And then with the float, and of course then there's your peak charge, and there's a few other things that you can do there. There's oh boy, now the term is slipping my mind, equalize. Equalizing your batteries where you literally push the voltage up higher than you would normally use it. It's something you do periodically to get all of your batteries to kind of balance out and be equal again. And on that one, when it comes to lithium batteries, I'm not exactly sure, because lithiums, when we were on grid, or off grid I should say, when we were off grid, we didn't have lithium. They had just come out and they were horrifically expensive, like way beyond. And so we still had all the lead acid, which you had to equalize. We did it about every month and a half. You had to equalize them, so it was part of the maintenance. Somebody's just put in here, you can buy solar panels used by the pallet much cheaper. Yes. In fact, my first system we bought used because it was right after Y2K. It was in 2005 we bought it. I found a Y2K-er that was more than glad to get rid of his system, and I bought it for about half of what it cost him, so he lost a lot of money, and it was awesome for us. Solar panels have come way down in cost. When we first, in 2005, we were paying about $6 a watt for a solar panel. Now you can find solar panels for less than $1 a watt. Sometime back before we moved out here on grid, I actually bought a pallet of panels. I paid 85 cents a watt for buying that large amount of solar panels. Sold some to some friends, made a little bit of money on it, and they knew that I did, but I didn't pay for mine, but it paid for the shipping, paid for the freights with it and whatnot. And yes, you can sometimes find solar panels, though, do have a life. Different solar panels are different as far as what their life is, but the average life on a solar panel is about 25 years. They will go much longer. I've seen solar panels that were closer to 40 years old, still functioning quite well, though not like they did when they were new. So their life gradually begins to taper off at about that 6 to 8 year point, and by 25 they're getting quite down. So if you're buying used solar panels, you need to watch how old they are. Look to figure that out, because they may be selling some used solar panels at a really good price because they're only putting out 50% of what they should be or what they're rated to be because they are tired. So watch the used ones. Excuse me. The used equipment can be definitely save you. You just got to make sure that it's functional and that it's going to do the job for you. Do your homework. I'm going to, I know people are going to have more questions and whatnot. I was debating the best way, and I think what I want to do is, Matt, I want you to put info@testimonypress.org in the room, in the chat. So email address. What I'm going to do is direct people to email, have you email, that's Melanie's email address, because if I just give you my phone number, I'm also a home inspector and I'm working full-time construction, and we also do the publishing, so I'm very, very busy. And there's a lot of times I can't keep up and take phone calls and whatnot. I have customers with me, and so I'm not able to answer and take calls. So what I'm going to suggest is, I've been thinking about the best way to do this. Send your question. You don't have to be long and lengthy about it. Just give me a brief question and give me a phone number, and I'll call you and get you an answer, or I can sometimes maybe respond by email. Go ahead, Melanie.
Mark, we had a question much earlier on when we had the problem with the freeze up of the computer. And that was, a lady was asking, where can she get her equipment? And
I was going to share that, and
yes.
Thank you, dear. Matt, we're going to put the computer back in here. And so I'm going to go to a website.
While you're doing that, I have a question, a real quick question.
Okay.
I know that historically, DC current appliances were difficult to find, and from watching the sailing shows and the off-gridders on there, it seems that more and more the DC current run appliances are becoming available and popular. I'm just wondering if one is able to run strictly DC for their off-grid, for their energy source. Is that more efficient and might be less costly?
Actually, DC systems, from what I have found, are not more efficient, especially since, like, okay, let's use light bulbs as an example. A LED light bulb uses and puts out way more light than so an LED 120 volt light bulb uses way less electricity, puts out way more light than a 12 volt light bulb. 12 volt light bulbs are energy hogs. And I have seen this with, for instance, I had a lady that just recently requested that I put in a 12 volt, she'd had a solar system installed in her RV. And she wanted to be set up for her RV so she could be totally off grid and not reliant on any way, shape, or form to fossil fuels or anything. So wherever she was at, she lives in her RV, that she would be able to continue on. Good thought, good idea. She had a 12 volt energy efficient, side by side, it's a large RV, refrigerator, and she wanted me to install it. And so the first thing I went to doing was looking, okay, how much power does this use? What size wire do I need to wire this in so that it has enough power? Well, and some people this may not mean much, but I had to use 8 gauge wire. That is a very large wire for that DC fridge, for the distance, because the longer the distance, the bigger the size wire to be able to get that power there, like we kind of talked about earlier. We were running just right at 25 feet. It was about 23 feet that we ran. I had to use 8-gauge wire, and I said, this thing pulls a lot of power. Oh no, it's energy efficient. It's a 12 volt, it's very energy efficient. She called me a month later and she said, I can't keep my solar batteries charged. They keep going dead. She had 2 batteries, 2 12 volt lithium batteries in her system. Not very big ones, just kind of like the physical size of a car battery. And I said to her, so your issue is your issue is the amount of electricity that refrigerator is pulling. You're going to need to add more batteries, and you're going to need to add more solar panels, which probably means that you're going to need to add a second or a larger charge controller. And her response was, well, my solar system is plenty big enough to handle my RV. And I said, correct, but it's not big enough to handle your refrigerator. And I had warned her about that when we started. I told her of my concerns, but supposedly she'd been told that, and I had concerns, but I said, well, okay, and I've not actually owned a 12-volt refrigerator. So I thought, well, maybe they've done something to make them more energy efficient, but the wire size told me that this thing uses a lot of electricity to do what it does. And it works great. And as long as she has grid power to keep up her batteries, it can run off of the 12 volt and everything works fine. But if she has no power, it doesn't take long at all.
So you're saying that the trade-off for using DC versus AC is lost in having to compensate for how much voltage you're going to need to get things where it needs to go, because you're going to have, obviously you're going to have wires run all over the place,
right?
And you're going to have to double up on your gauges, most likely. Sounds like
a lot of that, plus it seems to me that okay, so years ago, the inverters were not very efficient. So, and what I mean by the inverter is to go from 12 volt or 24 volt system to a 120 volt. They weren't very efficient. They used a lot of electricity to make that interchange. Now the inverters are very efficient with the electronics that they have with them, and it works much better. And so actually most of the 120 volt things are better. Here's somebody, this is the person that I think is off grid. They said they had a DC fridge, but we went to a 120 volt fridge. It didn't really make a difference on the power. AC fridge is bigger. Exactly. When it really comes down to it, if you're really concerned enough that you think you have to have a refrigerator, if you are in a situation where we have grid down, no power, then you better have a big solar system to handle it, or you plan on using backup generator to compensate for it. When we were in Kenya, I never saw, I think only once did we see a refrigerator. They just don't have them. And yes, we could live without a refrigerator. So our thought was either get something that's efficient that our solar system will handle, or go with a propane. We had a propane refrigerator. And in the event that we couldn't buy propane, if it comes to that for whatever reason, and it actually came to it for a short time, it was wintertime, propane truck couldn't get to our house to fill our tank, and our tank was basically empty. And so we went a short time without. Of course, we just used the snowbank. We improvised. Worked great. So I had a question. So that I could fully understand it, can you quickly go over the MPPT for inverters and volts for panels? Thanks. Okay, so that's about a 3-part question. So to start with, the MPPT is for the charge controllers. So the charge controller does that, and it is multi-point tracking. I was trying to remember the exact term. Maximum power point tracking or multi-power point tracking. So essentially what it does is, okay, so years ago with solar panels, when they first came out, everybody just set them on a stand and they just sat one direction. You kind of tipped them towards the south and the best direction of the sun. In the wintertime, you stood them up a little more, and the summertime, you laid them out a little more flat because the sun was higher, because direct sunlight is how you get that best out of them. And then they came out with a device that was a tracking, so that your panel would literally tip and it would turn as it would turn around, or some of them would flip over this way. You know, they're set at an angle and they would literally follow the sun and flip from east to west, morning to evening. And then as soon as they'd come back. Well, the maximum power point tracking, what it technically does is it tracks the sun, I guess you could say electronically. It does what that physical panel movement does without physically moving your panel. And is it as good as moving the panel? No, moving the panel is definitely a step above an improvement for that. But you can get this multi PowerPoint tracking much cheaper, because to move panels, that equipment to do that is very expensive. And so being able to do it electronically through the MPPT is much more cost effective than physically moving it, being there's no moving parts with it. It takes less power. Some of them actually, they came out with some designs. It actually worked off of heat, and as the gas cylinder warmed up from the heat, it would cause it to expand, which would cause the panel to move. They played with all kinds of things to try to get it to work, and it does work. But the MPPT is much more efficient. Matt, can you scroll up so I can look at more of that questions? Where did it go? Oh, there it is, right there. Your mouse is on. I see it now. Okay, and the voltage for panels. Voltage for panels come in 12 volt, 24 volt. Probably better off to go 24 volt, the higher the voltage, like we were just talking with Richard here. The higher the voltage, the smaller the wire size that we have to use. And of course, wire being expensive, if we can use a smaller wire, it saves us on wire, and that really does add up, especially if you have to run it very far of a distance. It can add up really quickly and a lot. So 24 volt is much better to use as far as and now with being able to get charge controllers that are capable of taking like 200 volts input, you can connect several of those panels together in series, add those 24s up, and then be able to use that higher voltage yet, run it to the charge controller, it turns around, drops that voltage back down to say a 24 volt battery bank system. Your inverter is 24 volt. What we used to do, and 24 volts kind of become industry standard now. What we used to do is we had 12, 24, and 48 volt systems, and you would be sized for one of those. The 48 volt system was considered your large one for having to run further away, and of course, the higher that voltage, the bigger the price tags were. 24 has kind of become like standard. 12 volts are your little mini systems. Yeah, somebody's saying here 12 volt systems are okay for small things. Yep, and our first system for our whole house was 12 volt, but it wasn't as efficient, and it was... Where do you get the system? We'll get to that one. So go ahead and put my screen up, Matt. This is my favorite.
It's set wrong.
What?
It's set wrong.
What's set wrong?
You have it on the wrong mode. You have it on PowerPoint mode, not mirror.
Oh.
Keep talking and hand me your computer.
Okay. Let me hand Matt the computer here to. I can do it if I think about it a little bit, but he'll do it for me. He'll get it switched so we can see the screen. So there's numerous places that you can get. The one that I like the best, that I've used the most, the guys are really knowledgeable, helpful, is called Backwoods Solar. They're in Idaho. Okay. And I mean, there are other places. This is just one, and so I'm not putting down others. There's if you could find something that's more in your vicinity that maybe you could go talk to them, that might be a good thing. But this one here, we can see Backwoods Solar, woods plural, backwoodssolar.com. I don't get anything for promoting their site, but they handle a wide variety. As you can see here, we've got solar power, micro hydropower, water pumping. Their guys are.
They were excellent at answering questions any time of day when we needed help, though.
Yes, well, not any time of day, but when we had a question, as we were learning the systems and whatnot, putting it together, they were really good about helping us out. And sizing the system. So, they will talk to you about what you're going to do with your system, what you're going to run, and then they help you size it from there. Like the fellow that was talking with the 13,000 or 13 kW times 2, I really do think that somebody's trying to line, because not every salesman's honest. I think somebody's trying to line their pockets. And the system would work, but probably way overkill for what they need. It's surprising. We tend to all think that we need, is like me thinking I needed a large backup generator, and discovering the little 4,000 watt generator, that little Onan that we had, the used one, that thing sat there and ran. It did anything we needed to do, and we could light up that house with power, I mean, if we had company there or whatever, we'd have sometimes 20, 30 people there. We'd have entire main floor of the house lit up. We'd have.
And it was lit.
Oh yeah, it was lit up. Beacon on a hill. Anyway, and we had Melanie would be in the kitchen running equipment and stuff, and yeah, it was no problem. We didn't have any issues for running out. And just like these folks that were said, their gasoline, backup generator gasoline, runs about $20 a month. They're either very conservative, or they've got a properly sized system, or maybe a little of both. Our system, because of the printing, wintertime, we ran the $50 to $70 a month. Summertime, it was nothing. We just didn't run it. We didn't need to. There was no need to run the backup generator during the summertime. We had plenty of sun, and that was way up in the north where we didn't have that large amount of sun. Any other questions?
Can you, for those of us on the phone, can you tell us the email address?
Oh, email address. Okay, that's a good idea. I'd forgotten about that. So probably the easiest way, Matt put in there the link to our website for the contact form. I'm just going to give Melanie's email, the ministry email, which is
I did the email and the link.
Oh, did you do the email and link? Okay. So info, I-N-F-O, at Testimony Press, TESTIMONYPRESS.org. So info at testimonypress.org.
Thank you.
So yeah, and I think that's the best way. Then I can, and I'll try to be prompt about getting back to you. It's just this way, you're not calling and I'm having to say, I don't have time, I can't talk now. So other questions? Okay, I'm going to ask a question. Would anybody like to do this again, except maybe more detailed on a specific aspect of the power system? I honestly didn't know I was going to be doing this until late Friday afternoon. So this has been a mad scramble to put this together, and I didn't get much prepare time. But would it be helpful? I mean, if we went in more detail.
Personally, I'm to the point where the only more detail we need is very specific for my situation. I'm assuming it would be that way for others too.
Okay. Off-grid solar system is definitely more work for whoever's maintaining it and taking care of it. It's definitely way less expensive. You will cut your cost. Some people have said, oh, it takes years and years to recoup. It's cheaper to be online, but on the power grid. But I totally totally disagree with that. Okay, a 12 volt 3000 watt inverter needs 250 amps for full output, where 48 volt 3000 watt inverter needs 62 amps.
The other thing I don't think I would ever get used to online or on power is the surges and the shutdowns without any notification. You know, somebody hits a power pole and boombo, you've got 3 printers running or 4 printers running or 5 printers running, and they jam, they mess up, you've lost paper, you've lost time, and then you're at the mercy of the power grid to whenever they get that up and going and fixed. So, you know, the thing of being independent and free from a system is, there's nothing like it.
Yeah, there was one time when we lived out west, when we were off grid, that we literally, I came to work, and it had been over a weekend. I came to work and I got there and there was no power, and I was like, oh, we got no power. And they're like, yeah, we haven't had any power since Friday. Power went off. It's been down. The main substation blew, and power's been down. I had no clue. We were off grid. We didn't know it. The whole area had been out of power. So there's some nice benefits that way. It's not just for a, quote, doomsday preparation. In fact, if you're doing it for that reason alone, reevaluate. Do it because it's cost effective. Do it because it gives you more independence. It just all the way around is a better deal. So anyway, and for those that are on by phone, our suggestion was Backwoods Solar, BACKWOODS, and then SOLAR.com. Those guys there, it's been a while since I've called them because we've been away from it for a little while, but they know their stuff and help you get. And the fellow with the 13 kW system times 2, I'd suggest giving Backwoods Solar a call and get an opinion from them as to what you've been sized with, and let them compare it, tell them what you're going to be doing, and help size you a system, and then make your decision. I'm not saying buy it from Backwoods Solar. I'm just saying then make your decision as to what you actually need. Somehow I got a hunch salesmen are making a lot of extra money from you, because that's going to be an expensive system. Okay, any more questions, or should we call it quits?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that we could like I said, this was kind of a last-minute thing that we had threw together. Melanie sent out a bunch of emails. Actually, a lot more people came than I expected, which is good. Hopefully, it's been a blessing. Let's just have a quick prayer as we close. Our dear Heavenly Father, we come thanking you for being our help through the technical difficulties and being our help through everyday life. And as we strive to prepare physically, help us to keep our focus on preparing spiritually to meet our King, so that we may walk faithfully with our Lord and Savior. In Jesus' name.